Come closer, wanderer. In the quiet heart of the city, where time moves differently, there's a garden no one sees unless it wishes to be found. Tonight, we'll step inside, past the gates of ticking ivy, into a place where every moment blooms into magic. Let your eyes grow heavy, the garden is waiting. In Lemuria, people told time by the sky. Days were stitched from migrating flocks, and nights were hemmed with constellations whose names tasted like fruit when you said them. The year Mira Thorne kept her first field journal, the sky simply forgot. One evening the sun went down with its usual ceremony of pinks and brass, and the next morning there was no morning at all, only a velvet dark so gentle and complete that lamps felt shy about being lit. The town of Hallowmere tried to be sensible. Bakers preheated their ovens by the town clock. Children braided glow-moss into their hair and attended lessons in rooms bright as jars of honey. Fishermen took to sounding bells at the mouth of the harbor, because bells could find their way farther in the dark than voices. But by the third day without dawn, even the reasonable began to listen for unreasonable explanations. That's when the archivist arrived, walking out of the dark as if it had given him directions. He was not old, not young, one of those faces that looks like it's been practicing belonging everywhere. He carried a satchel the size of a promise and a staff wrapped in rings of copper that hummed when the wind changed. "My name is Ashfun," he told the town elders, and in his voice was the hush of libraries and the scrape of chairs being tucked in. "I'm a keeper of records on things that do not stay put. Your night has moved." "Moved from where?" asked the mayor, whose job was to be brave with her eyebrows. "From a story," Ash said, as if that were sufficient. He unrolled a map that was empty except for a single star in its upper corner. The star did not glow so much as insist upon being noticed. Mira had come to the meeting with her own maps, tidy sketches of coves and kitchen garden paths. She stood in the back, trying not to be the kind of person who asks questions before she has earned the right. The star on Ash's map tugged at her, the way an unsolved riddle tugs at a good sleeper trying to be good. "The last time this happened," Ash continued, "it was the work of three people who did not know each other until they did, a singer, a lamplight, and a cartographer. They turned the sky back on by giving it what it had lost." "What does a sky lose?" the mayor asked, gently incredulous. "A scale to sing in. A reason to be seen. A way home," Ash said. He looked past the elders toward the back where those without assigned bravery stood. His eyes rested on Mira the way a compass needle rests on north. "I'm told Hallowmere has a cartographer." Mira should have looked over her shoulder to see who he meant. Instead she lifted her journal, and the room approved with a murmur that felt like being wrapped in a shawl you hadn't realized was meant for you. "Then we have two," Ash said. "I can sing a little, when reminded. We will need a lamplight." "Lamps," said an elderly woman by the door, "I can do with my eyes closed." She smiled at her own small joke. "Name's Grain." "Grain," Ash repeated respectfully, as if he had been hoping for exactly that syllable. "We'll also need passage to the places where the sky keeps its levers." "Levers," echoed the mayor. "We have levers for bridges. The sky, I'm afraid the sky has never asked to be fixed by committee." "Which is why it will not be a committee," Ash said mildly. "It will be a story." Those are better at traveling. They set out quietly so as not to wake anyone who might go looking for reasons not to let them go. Ash brought the map with the single star. Grain brought her tools wrapped in cloth that smelled comfortingly of walnuts and smoke. Mira brought her journal and the habit of writing until a worry made sense. The first place the sky keeps its levers, Ash said, was the grove of kept names. Stars listen for themselves there, he explained. If they hear nothing, they worry they've been forgotten. Can a star be vain? Grain asked, good-naturedly scandalized. Not vain. Particular, Ash said. Like a teapot that refuses to whistle unless someone intends to be comforted. They walked into the night as if it were merely a larger room. The roads remembered them. Owls went about their business with professional courtesy. When the town was a pilgrim's fair distance behind, Mira saw a light ahead that did not behave like any light she knew, no flicker, no sway, simply a steadying. The grove announced itself not with trees but with names stitched into the air, each syllable pinned to a thread of light. If you spoke softly, a name would lean toward your voice. Mira reached up without thinking. Halomir, she whispered, and the town's name quivered as if it had been waiting to be told it still existed. She touched another thread and felt at once the giving in the word and the asking. Kept names were like that, half vow, half listening. At the grove's heart stood a stone bowl filled with darkness that glittered on its own. Ash bowed to it with that modesty he wore like weather. This is where the singer works, he said. I told you, Mira said, I don't. But she did. Everyone does, in emergencies. Singing is the long way to speak and the short way to mean. She hummed at first, the kind of tune one uses to coax a kettle, and then the tune found words, and then the words found the place they had been trying to get to. If you forget your name, we will keep it. If you forget your light, we will see it until you do. If you forget your path, we will smooth the mile ahead. The bowl answered with a ripple like a cat approving of a chair. Above them, something loosened. Not dawn, not yet. Something like a sigh where the horizon should be. Ash smiled. One lever, he said. Two more. They slept beneath the eldest oak, who remembered how to lean without falling. In the almost morning that was not morning, Mira dreamed of a map with no land, only starlight braided into roads. When she woke, Grain was already up, whittling a lamp's frame. Teapots, stars, the lamplight mused. Everything wants to know it was meant to be used. Mira sketched the grove into her journal, careful with the scale of the bowl and the way the names hung at differing heights. She labeled the drawing the first promise, and when the ink dried it felt less like a drawing and more like something that had decided to be true. They set out again before Halomir's bells could miss them. Somewhere far off, a gull laughed, which everyone knows is the sea's way of encouraging you to mind your footing. Ash's copper rings hummed in a new key. Mira checked the star on the blank map. It had moved, no, not moved, it had invited them to follow. Where to next? She asked. Ash pointed toward the low hills wearing shadows like shawls. The place where lanterns remember how to teach the dark to be kind. The lampright's field, Grain said softly, like a person greeting her childhood self without startling her. They walked. The night walked with them, curious and patient, and all the while the sky did not break but, Mira thought, perhaps it was listening. By the time they reached the field, Mira could smell brass the way you can smell rain before it remembers how to fall. It lay in a fold of the hills like a forgotten plate, full of stems of glass and wire sprouting from the soil. At their tips, dim seeds, each no larger than a fingernail, each harboring a drowsy light. The ground between the stems was thick with lantern weed, broad leaves that reflected whatever brightness dared to pass. Grain sighed the way people sigh when they discover a door in a house they've lived in all their life. I learned here, she admitted, almost shy. Before I toiled for coin and burned my fingers for festivals. Before I knew you could be paid for coaxing light to like people. How do we ask the field to help the sky? Mira asked, aware of the absurdity and delighted by it. We do not ask, Grain said. We demonstrate. She set to work without fuss. Her hands moved with the intimacy of someone who had mended lamps by listening to them. She bound 3 stems with copper thread, slid a glass bell over their heads, and breathed into it, not breath, precisely, intention shaped like breath. The seedling lights perked up, glanced at one another, some lights are very social, then settled into a cooperative glow. It was warm enough to kindle kindness in bare fingers. It was not morning. It was nearer to morning than they had been a minute ago. Ash sang again while Grain worked, weaving a melody that reminded light of its duty to be gentle and brave at once. Mira sketched, labeled, measured the space between stems. She took down Grain's instructions with the precision of someone who had learned that precision is a form of care. They made a dozen lanterns in a row, then another dozen, and planted them along the path from the field toward the grove like a string of good decisions. When they turned to test their work, the dark did not flee, a relief. It yielded. The field became a room. The night found corners it could rest in without sulking. Lanterns don't defeat the dark, Grain said, wiping her hands on her apron. They give it manners. Ash looked up. The star on his map thrummed faintly, as if a heartbeat far away had been encouraged but not convinced. 2 levers pulled, he murmured. One more, and the sky might remember how to do the rest itself. What is the third? Mira asked, feeling the shape of the answer before she heard it. The waystone, Ash said. Cartographer's work. No one can go where there is no path, and dawn is a traveler. Mira swallowed. In Hallowmere she had been content to map fence lines and berry bushes, the safe intricacies that make a place habitable. This was different. This was being asked to draw the line the light would trust. How do you map what isn't there? She asked. You begin with what is, Ash said simply, and touched her journal. You only ever begin with what is. They left the lamprites' field with a long hush behind them, the kind that is less silence than agreement. As they climbed, the night thinned until Mira could almost believe she saw a lighter shade of velvet on the horizon, the way a closed eye knows the window has been opened. The land spread out in slopes and old scars. The waystone, if it existed, would be where lines liked to meet. They found it at the top of a hill where wind kept the grass obedient. It was not a stone so much as a place where everything had remembered itself at once. The earth bore the shallow grooves of 1,000 boots that had stood to watch something begin. The air was serious in the way air gets before rain, before speeches, before first steps. Mira knelt. She took out her chalks and her straightedge and the little compass that had been her grandmother's and smelled faintly of lemon. She did not draw a road. She drew a consent, a series of markers the sky could agree to greet. A rhythm at eye height, post, lintel, lintel, post. A measure any light with legs could keep. It needs a name, Ash said quietly, because names are levers too. The pilgrim's measure, Mira said, and the chalk in her hand approved by not breaking. She marked the first 10 measures, then 20, then 50, the pattern bending with the land so that no traveler would be asked to walk against their own breath. Grain hung 3 of her new lanterns at the first 3 gates. The glow reached out to touch the next empty frame as if practicing future. At the 50th measure, Mira stood and listened. The dark on the far side of the last frame was not as thick as it had been. In it she could hear a long thread being pulled through a fabric, then another, as if the night were being hemmed back to its ordinary size. Ash set his staff upright. The copper rings were still. He smiled at Mira the way people smile at bridges that hold. There, he said, with satisfaction and the gentlest pride. 3 levers. Now we wait. They did not have to wait long. The horizon, if that word could be trusted anymore, brightened the smallest imaginable fraction. The grove's bull purred from half a valley away. The lampright's field responded like a choir choosing the next note by listening hard to the first. The pilgrim's measure took a breath and then another, the way lungs do when they're told it's safe. A pale seam appeared above the hills. It was not courage yet. It was the possibility of courage. Dawn, Grain whispered, as if it might frighten. Dawn, Ash agreed, and did not move, because sometimes the best help is to stand still while a friend remembers themselves. Mira lowered her journal and let the sky draw itself for once. She watched as the seam widened into a line, as the line learned how to be a blade, as the blade grew tired of sharpness and softened into day. The first birds were scandalized. The second birds pretended they had expected this all along. Lamps all over Hallowmere decided to be unnecessary and were pleased about it. They walked home as if they had been gone a century and also a single night. At the town square, people were already forgiving one another for the fretfulness of past hours. Children held the dark up to the light and laughed to see it be ordinary again. The mayor shook Ash's hand, then Grain's, then Myra's with the vigor of a person who had rehearsed gratitude and was relieved to use it. "What do we owe you?" Someone asked Ash, because the practical questions are polite. "Keep the levers oiled," he said. "Sing when you don't feel like it. Hang lamps where violence might have preferred to be. And let your cartographers draw paths for things you don't understand yet." Mira thought that was payment enough. That night, after a day's worth of dawn, she opened her journal to make the final marks. The star on Ash's map faded to sleep. She wrote, in a margin that always answered if addressed kindly, "If the night tries to forget itself again, we know the story to tell it." The margin replied, in Ash's tidy hand, "Stories are levers, too." And far to the north where neither map yet pointed, something listened with interest. The dawn held for 6 days. On the 7th, it stumbled around midday, putting a hand out to catch itself on the top of the barley field and leaving a bruise of shadow. People noticed. People always notice when light forgets a step. The bruise spread into early evening and refused to be convinced by clocks. Mira met Ash and Grain at the harbor where bells talked to distance. Ash's copper rings were impatient. Grain's apron wore a scorch mark in the shape of a question. Mira had not slept. Maps drawn on half-sleep have a way of being too honest. "It isn't the same," she said, before anyone could pretend optimism into the conversation. "The levers are where we left them. The sky is listening. But something else is listening, too." "The North," Ash said, like a person admitting a suspicion he had declined to feed. "What does the North want?" Grain asked, no patience for theatrics. "To be remembered," Ash said. "Old stories are stubborn. This one is older than our 3 levers. It's the story that says, after a long summer comes a long night, and the night is owed its due." "Owed is not the same as welcomed," Grain said tartly. "Also, owing has terms." "Let's go make some," Mira said, surprising herself. "If the night is a traveler with an itinerary, we can meet it at the border and ask to see its papers." They walked north under a sky that kept trying to put its stars back on in the wrong order. The road narrowed into a path and then into a thought. At the first stone cairn, raised by someone who had needed to know where they were in order to go on, they turned east toward the long lowlands that drink fog for breakfast. Herders appeared like punctuation marks on the horizon and nodded at them the way people nod at weather that has decided to pass responsibly. At dusk that was early and also right on time, they met the lantern. It was walking down the path carrying its handle in its own little hand of bent wire. The flame inside sloshed like soup. It stopped when it saw them and tipped itself, which is how lanterns bow. "Good evening," Grain said at once, because a lamplight knows respect is a wick. "Are you lost?" The lantern made a small chiming sound like a teaspoon tapping the rim of a cup. Ash crouched, because one speaks to small determined things at eye level. "Where is your person?" he asked. "We'll see them back to you." The lantern turned in a slow circle, the way a person does when trying to recall the last place they had their spectacles. Then it chimed again, 2 notes falling, one rising, as if to say, "Forgot. Forgot. Remember." "It's been sent," Mira said, hearing it in the way she hears topography under her feet. "Set out from somewhere to find something, and the something moved." "Or the sender," Ash said. He stood and dusted off his knees. "Let's keep company. We were going that way anyway." They walked with the lantern. It kept its flame cheerful, which improved the evening quite a bit. At the second cairn, the lantern tugged its handle toward a side path clearly in love with thistles. They followed into a stand of wind-bent firs where fog liked to practice being ominous and usually failed. At the heart, a circle of stones that had stored a fire's warmth long after the fire was done. The lantern chimed, delighted and apologetic, and set itself on one of the stones as if resuming a shift. "Meeting place," Ash said. 2 parties, 1 lamp. Someone was late. Someone else left a message. He held his hand over the lantern's mouth. The flame lifted into a line, wavered, and then rode on the air in soot that could not decide if it wanted to be smoke. Whiteford. Ask for the bell. Whiteford's the last town before the North Keep, Grain said. The bell means the night watch. She glanced at Ash. The one that listens in both directions. The same, Ash said. Not soldiers. Rememberers with sharp ears. Mira felt the map in her pocket shuffle its own pages. The star Ash had nursed was asleep, but a new mark had appeared, no glow, just the insistence of graphite. North Keep, where the old Long Night Story had lived before coming south for a visit. Let's go ask for a bell, she said, and the lantern chimed in firm agreement. They reached Whiteford by lamp o'clock, which locals know is, in time for soup. The town kept its streets wide as if expecting processions. People posted notices of small necessities on boards outside the bakery. Need a kettle. Trade, 3 spools of thread, 1 sturdy word. Bells hung at the corners of alleys, not for alarm, but for reporting, the kind of bells that can't be rung dishonestly. They pulled the smallest bell by the watchhouse door. It answered in harmonics, which means the watchers inside had a sense of humor. We're looking for the night that's trying to be longer than it should, Ash told the woman at the desk, who had ink on her sleeve and a gaze like a horizon. You found it, she said wryly, pushing forward a ledger already open to the day's column. Name it and it shrugs. Deny it and it sulks. We've been ringing the hourly so the sky can check its work, but we're not the cause. The North Keep has been humming. Humming as in singing? Grain asked. Humming as in a hive remembering a queen it read about in a very old book, the watcher said. You look like people who won't laugh if I tell you something odd. We are professionally ordinary about odd, Ash said. The first frost came on time, the watcher said, but the second came with that bruise in the sky, the one you can see even at noon. The Long Night Story doesn't want our town, it wants our attention. It wants us to stand at the border and say yes. Then we will go stand there and say no, but politely, Mira said. And bring a lamp that remembers how to teach the dark to be kind. The watcher's mouth twitched, a private smile at a joke only future people would understand. Take the north gate, she said. When the ground starts to sound like paper, you've reached the old road. Paper? Grain asked. The kind maps are made of, the watcher said. And stories. They left with their walking lantern a little prouder for being assigned to a border post. The North Gate did what gates do at night when given a good reason, it blessed them without fuss. Beyond, the ground changed underfoot, less soil, more memory. It crackled softly, not with frost, but with the brittle satisfaction of a page being turned. At the first milestone, a real stone, let it be noted, tradition gets things right when it feels like it, the sky gathered itself for a statement. It didn't speak in thunder. It brought a wind that smelled like pine grown under cold constellations and laid it over their shoulders like a draft cloak. Hear it? Ash asked, and Mira realized she did. Not words. A pattern. The way a familiar tune comes to your mouth when you are washing cups. It wants winter, she said. A good one. Not a swallow you whole one. Winter is a worker, Grain sniffed. We can negotiate hours and breaks. They made camp where the old road bent as if deciding and dying on the same day. The lantern set itself where it would not trip anyone. Ash sang a song about bread that turned into a song about courage because that happens when one is honest. Mira drew the wind, yes, drew the wind, because movement has shape if you listen with your pencil. Somewhere north, the hum lifted a half step, as if pleased to be answered. At dawn that wasn't, they reached the border everybody spoke of as if it were a wall. It was not a wall. It was a meadow. The grass there was a shade of silver that had no business being on grass, and it moved in the wind like a choir shifting its weight between verses. Beyond the meadow, the ground rose into the low black line that marked the North Keep's beginning. Waiting in the middle of the meadow, a line of posts bearing small bells and a kind of sign only useful people post, handwritten, patient, brief. Travelers to the North Keep. Ring once to enter, twice to leave. Speak clearly. The North does not pretend. Bring work for the winter. Idleness is loud. Grain rang once, practical as ever. The bells answered with a chord just dissonant enough to wake a sleepy clause in a treaty. The air sharpened. The hum became a voice, not a single voice, but the composite of many people saying the same thing to the same hearth over generations. If you want a long night, be prepared to keep it. Terms, Ash said under his breath. A scholar offered a negotiated document. Good. Mira stepped forward until her boots brushed the silver grass. The lantern hopped to her side, its handle warm against her wrist. We're from Hallowmere, she said to the meadow, because meadows are great listeners when asked to be. We've pulled the 3 levers that remind the sky it is welcome. We will not accept a night that mistakes itself for rule. But we will receive the winter that works. The bells rung by wind alone answered in minor thirds. The grass stilled as if lending its attention. What work do you bring? The hum asked, not unkind, not deferent. Businesslike. Grain lifted a lamp she had built the night before while others feigned sleep. It was sturdier than the field sprouts, its glass thick as patience, its frame of twisted brass that would hold even if a mittened hand fumbled. Light for crossroads and kitchens, she said. I offer maintenance and instruction. No lamp will be asked to do heroics. Ash raised his staff. Songs, he said. Not of triumph, not of doom. Enumeration songs, so children can count the days without learning to fear them. Lullabies that do not lie to tired people. Mira held up her journal, which seemed paltry until you saw the lines inside it settle a quarrel between 2 hills. Paths, she said. I will lay the pilgrim's measure from Whiteford to your first watchtower. We will set posts at breath lengths. No one will be asked to walk beyond their warmth. The meadow considered. The hum softened. Somewhere a fox decided to proceed with its plan. Finally, agreed, with addenda. We require bells rung by people who would rather not ring them. We require tea in places where tea has been rationed only for ceremony. We require the admitting of how hard this is and how brave, in equal measures. Done, Grain said, already listing supplies. We'll need kettles rated for stubborn water. Done, Ash said, eyes bright with the relief of being asked for something true. "We'll need small choirs and permission to go off-key." Mira nodded. "I'll need permission to correct a line when it lies to the map. And to rest on the fourth gate." She looked at the lantern. "We'll need you to choose 3 apprentices." The lantern chimed, pleased and nervous, which is the correct mood for responsibility. "Enter," the hum said, and the meadow sighed back into being grass. They worked. It did not feel like a quest. It felt like market day when the list is long and the purse is exact. Grain set up a bench by the first watchtower and taught whoever came with an honest face how to trim a wick so it does not waste itself on showing off. Ash taught the town to sing the hour song, 8 notes that could be rung on bells or hummed into scarf-wrapped hands, each note a kind of handshake between the day and the night. Mira walked the measure. Not all at once. She refused to make a myth of herself. She had seen what myths do to knees. Post, lintel, lintel, post, she set the rhythm through sleet, through "why are we doing this" looks from dogs, through the kind of fatigue that makes arithmetic feel like betrayal. Every 50 gates she stopped and wrote the truth. Today the wind argued with us and learned to moderate. Today a child carried a post twice as far as I could have imagined. Today my hand found the habit of drawing even when I was laughing. The bruise in the sky lightened at the edges, then darkened at the middle, then learned to be edges and middle at once. Nights lengthened responsibly. Mornings arrived as if they had checked in with their supervisor. Whiteford's bells grew bored at last and delighted to be bored. At the end of the first fortnight, the meadow posted a new sign. "Thank you. The long night is working its agreed hours. Suspicious silences may be reported to any fox." Grain laughed so hard she had to sit down. Ash wrote it into the ledger with ceremonial ink. Mira added a tiny fox in the margin of her map, tongue out, as if to say, "I'm on break, but I'm listening." And then, because equilibrium is a jealous instrument, the North sent them a test. On a morning the color of pewter with kindness underneath, the hour song faltered at gate 301 of the Pilgrim's Measure. Not the song, people could sing. The gate itself hummed wrong, as if a note had fallen through a crack and kept falling. Mira pressed her ear to the lintel. The wrongness had shape, a hollow where someone had taken their promise home and forgotten to return it. "Break in the line," she said, not angry, not panicked. "Something's borrowed itself." Borrowed itself where? Grain asked, squinting into the honest mist. "North," Ash said, his rings articulating the same suspicion in copper. "Where the story that wanted too much lives. They followed the wrongness the way one follows a draft to a cracked window. It led off the measure into a stand of firs so dignified even crows bowed. At the heart of the stand, a clearing where snow did not collect and a stone that pretended to be ordinary and failed. On that stone, a lantern like theirs, but unlit. Beside it, a boy. He was perhaps 12, perhaps more, the way winter makes certainty difficult. His hands were in his pockets, his jaw set, his eyes rehearsing a glare they had not yet earned. "You've taken one of the gates," Mira said gently. He did not deny it. "We needed it," he said, chin up. "Our place didn't get on your map." "Which place?" Ash asked. "All balm, no honey." Fellfield, the boy said. If Whiteford is a mouth, we're a missing tooth. Nobody notices a missing tooth until you try to chew. Grain lowered herself to the stone opposite him. All creeks welcome. Who told you to come take a thing without ringing a bell? No one tells you to do the things you can't ask permission for, he said, and Myra's heart hurt in a way that felt like truth. Is your lantern out? Mira asked. He shrugged. Shrugs are the codex of the proud. It was never really in. Let's go visit. You're not on the map, Ash said, standing as if this had been the plan since morning. We'll bring the gate home together. And we'll draw your tooth. They walked to Fellfield through paths that loved to pretend they did not exist until you insisted. It was a scatter of houses that had learned to lean into wind, a school whose bell was a saucepan, a store that could find the exact nail you needed by sniffing. The lantern poles were there, but their lamps were jars with strings and hope. No one brought you lamps? Grain asked, not accusing, only making room for the answer to be better later. We don't line up well on market days, said a woman stacking wood with the grace of a dancer. Folks think we like being left to our resources. We are very fond of resources. We could be fonder of neighbors. Ash taught the hour song to the saucepan bell. It rang so sincerely the fox posted outside nodded approval. Mira redrew the pilgrim's measure to bend a little toward Fellfield, the way people bend their days when kindness asks. Grain took 3 of her best frames out of her pack, the ones she had been saving for the watchtower's staircase, and installed them on the main road, because main roads are declarations, not accidents. The boy watched as if he were being dared not to learn something. Finally he said, I thought if I took the gate, we'd be on the map because someone would be angry enough to look. That works, Mira said. It is not my favorite strategy. What is? He challenged, ready for homework, not punishment. Ring the bell twice, she said. Once to leave, once to return. And leave a note on the door with your name on it, even if the door is the sky. He looked at the ground in the way people do to give their eyes time to stop rehearsing. I'm Evo, he said to the dirt, which is still saying it to this day. They carried the gate back together, boy at the lintel, Grain with the post, Ash and Mira with the truth of how mistakes are fixed. At gate 301, the hum found its note again, relieved, as if a missing page had been slid back into a book without the librarian catching on. That night the bruise in the sky faded a shade toward lavender. Whiteford's watcher wrote a new line in her ledger, Fellfield now visible. The meadow posted an addendum to its sign, all teeth welcome. Someone drew a grin beneath it very badly and nobody corrected them. The North Keep hummed a different tune as if the queen in the old book had changed her mind about ruling and decided to garden. Winter came honest and stayed agreed. The long dark stretched to proper lengths and snapped back on schedule. People adjusted to counting by lanterns at tea time and letting the hour song set bread to rise. Children grew smug with the ability to tell time by the taste of the air. On the last night before the first festival of proper mourning, Hallowmere gathered at the harbor. Bells were wound with evergreen. The mayor had a speech that, like most good speeches, had been edited by at least 4 grandmothers. Grain had set 100 lamps along the quay at exactly elbow height. Ash tuned his staff's rings with a small hammer. Mira stood at the end of the pier with her journal and a lamp of her own, not fancy, not famous, sturdy as a truth you can sit on. She set it on the post where the fog usually perched and waited. The sky above the water wore its best black. The bruise had almost healed, but you could still see where the night had been too long for a week or two. On that blackness, a seam appeared, not the raw seam of first fixing, but the elegant seam of a dress mended by someone who likes you. Ash sang the hour song once, slow. The bells caught it, not quite together, and it was right because it was real. Grain lit the first lamp with her flint and her intention and stepped back, respecting both. Mira did what she had done since the grove, she spoke to the thing as if it could hear. Morning, she said, without drama. We have kept our part. The seam widened. Pink had a sip of itself and decided to stay. The water became a mirror that knew when to reflect and when to be wet. A flight of starlings practiced punctuation. Names, Ash said softly beside her, as if remembering something he had been saving for now. Mira breathed in the salt, the lamp smoke, the relief. Halomir, she began, and the town's name leaned toward the morning the way a person leans toward a hug they chose to accept. Whiteford. Fell Field. The Lamprites' Field. The Grove of Kept Names. The Pilgrim's Measure. The Meadow of Terms. The North Keep. She named them all, even the places she had not drawn yet but intended to, because intention is a kind of naming when kept. As each name left her mouth, a new fold of light opened, as if the morning had been waiting to be introduced properly to each place before showing its face there. Children cheered at the exact moment their own backyards lit up. A fox on the edge of the crowd nodded, on duty. Grain cried in a craftsman's way, unembarrassed, efficient, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand so she could see to adjust a wick. Ash's rings went still, perfectly, as if satisfied with the chord they'd helped tune. The dawn arrived like a guest who had decided to be family. Later, when the soup was gone and the speeches remembered to stop, Mira walked the pilgrim's measure alone, the way one walks a fence after a storm to thank it. At gate 301, a new note had been hung, IVO rang twice. She laughed out loud, the sound carrying to a pair of crows who approved like critics who have been fed. At the waystone, she found the boy himself, now with a lantern whose handle fit his glove as if it had been made for it. He looked taller in the morning, but so did everyone. Map, he said, by way of greeting. Gate, she answered, by way of trust. They stood there until standing felt like the right end to the right chapter. Then they walked toward Whiteford to report suspicious silences to a fox in person, because promises kept are an appetite one feeds on purpose. Back in Halomir that evening, Mira wrote the last line of this story knowing it would be the first line of the next. We did not defeat the night. We taught it our names and the hours we keep, and in return it taught us how to hold a lantern without believing we are the flame. She closed the journal. Ash put on a kettle. Grain set a lamp on low, because even in day a lamp likes to help. The town went on being a town. The sky remembered its part. And somewhere north, in a place with more gardens than thrones, the old long night story shelved itself with a satisfied thump, willing at last to be read when needed and not when feared. If a traveler came to Hallowmere asking how morning learned their names, someone would point them to the map in the watch house and the meadows posted terms, and also to the bakery where you could hear the hour's song in the way the bread was torn. And if that traveler stayed long enough to see lamps at elbow height and foxes on break and children counting time by the taste of the air, they might decide, as Mira did when she finally put down her pencil, that the best levers are the ones you hardly notice until the world is working again. And that night, when the town fell asleep, safely, on time, the sky tucked them in with a darkness that had manners.